My name is Anne Lee. I've lived in Lexington for 20 years. My maiden name was Schmall, and my paternal grandfather's name was Karl Adolf Schmall, and he was born in Kassel, Germany, on August 9th, 1894. I never knew him. He died in 1943. But I've heard many stories about him passed down through my father, who he himself died about 5 years ago. Karl's father was Friedrich Schmall, and his mother was Anna Hubach. And family legend has it that I was born exactly 100 years after Anna and was named for her. However, it turns out I was actually born 102 years after her. My brother was born 100 years after her, so he should have been the girl, and just wasn't. But his middle name is Frederick or Friedrich. So Karl was actually named after his older brother, Karl, who died of diphtheria when he was very young. So Karl was the second Karl Schmall. And he had two younger sisters, Helene, we called her Lena, and Erna. And I knew both of them. They lived long lives and they died in the 1980s. So I did spend some time visiting them in Germany. They lived in Kassel. Both of them had beaux, fiancés, that they met and got engaged to right before the First World War. And sadly, both men died in the war. And the sisters never married, and they lived together in Kassel for the rest of their lives. And they actually brought my father up. So we're quite connected to them. I actually grew up in Switzerland, and we would travel at least once a year to Germany to visit relatives and also visit some of the places that Karl and Anna lived and that my father lived in. Karl wanted to be a forestry chief like his father, but instead went into theology. In 1912, Karl entered the University of Marburg in Germany. He had wanted to go into forestry like his father, but instead started theological studies. However, then the war broke out, and on his birthday, on his 20th birthday, he enlisted. He joined the 83rd Infantry. It's the 3rd Kurhessian Infantry that was based in Kassel, in his hometown. And he was an infantryman. He rose pretty quickly up the ranks to lieutenant, but he was part of the ground forces. I don't know what kind of action he saw. He must have seen some, because he started out in France, where a lot of the killing fields were. He was sent to Romania and Russia, and then ended back in France. He was captured in France and sent to a POW camp in the south of France, in the town of Uzes. However, I've been doing some research and was able to find the card with his name on it that was put together. The Red Cross in Geneva put together a list of all the POW soldiers, and they have him listed. I have a piece of paper with his name. So this is Schmall, Karl Adolf. It has his birth date. They have it 9/8, because the Europeans do it the other way. They have him born in 1884, not in 94, but I'm almost positive this is him. It says he was in the infantry. And then I connected this basic information with, there's a stamp then connecting to a longer list of all the soldiers captured. And this is a list in French that actually has him right here, Karl Adolf. Again, the wrong date of birth. Has him living in Kassel. Here they have it spelled with a C, as it was, Cassel. But the interesting thing is, in French it says, officier capturé par sur l'armée allemande entre le 28 septembre et le 16 octobre en Belgique. So 1918. So this is saying he was captured in Belgium and captured right before armistice, which is kind of too bad, because he then stayed in the POW camp for 3 years. He was not released until 1921. So I'm not sure what he did there. He was an officer by that time. He started as an infantryman. He ended up as a lieutenant. Apparently he learned English and French while he was in the camp. I don't think he went with some of the common soldiers to rebuild parts of France like many of them did, but he was there for 3 years. He then returned to marry my grandmother. So her name was Martha Metzger, and she was a nurse. And the story again is that she met him in the POW hospital in the south of France, and they fell in love, and then she went back to Germany, they married, and so forth. It's romantic, but it's probably not the way it actually happened. So here's a picture of her as a nurse. I believe, based on her age in the pictures and the consecutive nature of the pictures that we got from my great aunts, they actually met before the war in Kassel. While it's a lovely story about how they met, I'm also convinced they met beforehand and that she didn't travel to France as a nurse, because my father gave me this book about, he gave it to me about 30 years ago. And it's a little notebook, and inside it says Martha Metzger, and then Kassel, Kriegsjahre, which means war years, 1914-1918. So this book, actually it says Schwester Martha Metzger, which means nurse. So it looks like she was in Kassel all these years, and it's a wonderful book that soldiers she cared for all wrote notes to her, thanking her for what she did. Hast du uns lieb means, you know, we're very fond of you. It's signed by different soldiers, and it's just a treasure trove of details and information. A little hard to read, but they're all signed Kassel. So I'm figuring she was there the whole time. Let's see, when Karl came back from the war, he continued his studies in theology. He ended up in a parish, having his own parish in Gottsburen, which is just outside of Kassel, and that's where my father was born in 1928. Mm-hmm. And sadly, his mother, Martha, died of heart ailment, undetermined heart ailment, in 1935. His father, Karl, remarried, and then Karl himself died in 1943 at age 49. And my father was 15 at the time, 14, 15, and remembers that his father never spoke about the war until that period when the Second World War had erupted. And then he did talk about his experiences and sadly, my father also ended up, being part of the last push when he was 16. So he became an anti-aircraft gunner in the town of Kassel. So history kind of repeated itself with my father too. And I think that's mostly what I have about Carl. I wish I'd known him. I'm doing more research and trying to fill some of the holes and also figure out some of the discrepancies, because all we have is what my father remembers, and he's gone, so we're going to lose that too. Karl Adolf Schmoll, this is what my father wrote about his father in June 2011. Karl Adolf Schmoll would be proud of his family were he still alive today. When he returned from the war, he was the only male Schmoll. Now we are 15, girls included, and considering the number of active males available, a good base for further growth and a soccer team. So this is what I have to say about Karl for us to remember. He was a courageous, good-hearted man. When still in good health, he laughed often, and a day did not pass without a good curse word when appropriate. His life was not altogether happy. He lost his father at age 15 and was in the war from start to end, plus a few years as a POW. We should all honor his memory and be proud of his service. So that was what my dad. So that's my story.
Thank you.